Welcome to the Politics of Survival. I'm your host, Tara Reade. I want to give a big shout out. Thank you to the new followers. Some are big accounts, some are small accounts. Doesn't matter to me. I think your support and you following my content, and many of you I follow back. I really appreciate it. I also notice I have a lot of different people with different views, and I love that because I don't like to be siloed. I don't like just to hear the same views all the time. It's good to have a little bit of entertaining debate, if that. I don't like the trolls, but I guess they're paid. They do what they do. And as all of you know, I've been trolled pretty heavily. Hopefully that'll get better someday. But right now we're in the election cycle. So there you have it. So with that, I wanted to mention a thank you to INN News and to Indy and to Reef and to Greg and to all the people that work behind the scenes to try to make this podcast possible, as well as others that really try to lift it. I have a new Instagram and a new TikTok. Please check it out. I'll try to put excerpts and reels on there frequently. As you all know, I had the big interview with Tucker Carlson back when he visited Moscow, Russia, and I was really honored that he featured my interview. There was only a couple of people that he did interview, and I was one of the lucky few, and I feel very honored. He is a visionary, and he is quite a voice for our generation of Americans, and we really need to listen to what he's saying. He's really calling out the plans that they have, the elites have in America for Americans, and it's dire indeed, so we need to be aware. And on that note, it was really amazing. I saw the news because I used to live in Oregon. 13 counties have applied now to secede to Idaho because they're so fed up with what they call the woke agenda of the other part of Oregon. So if anyone's telling you that the country being divided is just propaganda, it's true. I lived there at one time. Now I'm living in Moscow, Russia, but I'm telling you, America's very divided. And this is an example for 13 counties. You're not talking 3, you're not talking 1, 13. Okay, that's half the counties in the eastern part of Oregon are asking to leave the state and go with another state, Idaho. So that's something to really pay attention to as the rhetoric increases. Also, Bill Maher, who did horrible hit pieces on me, by the way, he's just a shit lib, if you will, in my opinion. He doesn't really add much to the discourse. He's not very intelligent. I don't know why he has a show. He's really not well read in geopolitics. Megyn Kelly, if you check out her show recently, just really gave him a schooling because he was just spouting, the regular empire stuff, and he was wrong on so many facts. We have a lot of those people in this space. They get paid a lot of money to simply read the script from the empire. They don't look at the facts. They don't look into what's going on behind the scenes, and it's really good to pay attention. So, support the people that do, like Sabby Sabs, like, Hard Lens Media, INN. These people are trying to give you another alternative source of information, both geopolitically, internationally, and nationally in America. So I have a lot of international viewers, and I really want to thank you for that. So this show is going to be more internationally based this time. We're going to be talking to a colleague of mine, actually, from RT, named Caleb Maupin, and he usually covers the UN in New York City. He's been to Moscow a couple of times. He has his own thing going. He's written books. He's really very well versed in history. He knows a lot about world history and American history. Very interesting person to talk to. And he also was one of the last Westerners to interview the president of Iran, if not the only one recently, last September. So we're going to talk about what just happened with the terrible accident that took the life of the president of Iran and his foreign minister and others, as well as the attempted assassination recently on the Slavic leader, and what is going on, what is happening, where we have two leaders that one did lose their life and another one almost lost their life, and lots of other things going on, as well as the Congo had a coup, or attempted coup, excuse me. It wasn't completed, and the 3 people arrested that were leading it, Americans. Okay, what does that mean? So we're going to ask Caleb Maupin those questions, and he's going to provide his views on what's going on geopolitically. And in the domestic part of the world right now. In America, of course, the trial that's going on about Donald Trump is really turning into a nothing burger, as everyone knew it would. It was basically being, you had a lot of people that ended up being exposed for the corruption, included Michael Cohen, who basically admitted on the stand to stealing directly from Trump. And Stormy Daniels, of course, suddenly went from talking about a consensual affair to saying that there was some sort of Me Too aspect to it, or that she was coerced or something. Meanwhile, she was paid. It was a mess. Anyway, the prosecutors, I think, have a lot to deal with. I don't really know if they're going to convict. Maybe they will technically, I'm not sure. Don't think it makes any difference at all with Donald Trump's race for the presidency. Biden has had more and more gaffes this week. Of course, people are bringing up my case, and I'm hoping I will be able to testify before Congress, because I would like an investigation into what Biden did to me when I was a staffer in 1993. I would like the opportunity to testify before Congress. We'll see. In the meantime, we're going to have a wonderful show talking about some of the other geopolitical events and talking about his new book. So welcome to the show, Caleb Maupin. Well, welcome, Caleb. Welcome to the show. I'm so glad to talk to you again. You've been on the show before, many times actually. And, I really appreciate you making the time, because your work with RT International and doing some of the big interviews you've done. You just recently even got to ask Vladimir Putin a question, but you also had some really other significant interviews, as well as being an author. So welcome.
Sure. Glad to be here.
Oh,
Good to see you again.
it's good to see you too. Yeah. So tell us, my audience, a little bit about the new book that you have out, and then we'll kind of launch into some of the geopolitics stuff that's going on.
Sure. Well, we published this book, Who Are the Houthis and What Are They Fighting For? Just kind of an introduction to this movement in Yemen that is making headlines all over the world. And so we put it together. We released it in January to try and just kind of give an understanding to average American people about who this movement in Yemen is, where it came from, what they're fighting for, and the point of the book was to try and show that the Houthi movement is really about economics. At the end of the day, the Yemeni people have been kept poor by a global financial system. It's a very prosperous and wealthy country, economically speaking, Yemen, but the people there are very, very poor because they don't control their own economy, because their natural resources, their arable land, their minerals, et cetera, are under the control of Western corporations, and they've been kept in utter poverty, and they've been fighting for economic development and independence. And so that's what the book kind of shows, that the roots of the Houthi movement are economic.
Great, great. Well, and how can people find it? And we'll have it basically down in the underneath where people can read and look at Caleb's links, but also where can they find the book?
Oh, well, the book is available anywhere books are sold. It's on Amazon. It's also, you can go to your local bookstore and just tell them the title, and it's available. It's got wide distribution. So, yeah.
Great, great. Well, this week was really significant. I mean, a lot happened. There was an attempted assassination of a Slavic president. There was this terrible accident that happened with the president of Iran and his foreign minister and others. And the reason I thought of you, Caleb, right away was because you had just been talking about your interview with the president of Iran that happened just last September. And I think, are you one of the only Westerners that interviewed him? Or, I mean, you're the only one I know of in recent history. Is that right?
Yeah, in September, he came to the United States for the United Nations General Assembly. And I believe he spoke with me. He spoke with NBC, and there was like maybe one or two other interviews. So it was really an honor when I found out that he'd reached out and that there was a desire for me to sit down with
Mhm.
him. I was quite flattered and honored, and we had a short conversation. And the time is limited. The United Nations General Assembly, you have a lot going on, and for the president of Iran to come to the United States is a big risk. Some of these world leaders won't even come to the United States for the General Assembly anymore because they worry about subversion and attack.
Wow.
So for him to come, I mean, it was a big risk, and he was in the United Nations Hotel, and they have an entire floor kind of set aside for the Iranians, surrounded by the NYPD and the Secret Service and all of that, and that, a huge amount of security because, they're obviously not very popular in New York City. A lot of people in New York City are big supporters of Israel and don't like Iran. But in addition to that, they're not popular with the American government at all, but they're relying on American Secret Service to kind of protect them. And so me and my crew from RT, we went and we set up and we had a conversation with the president of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And it was really an honor to be in the same room with him. And we had our conversation. And what also kind of blew my mind was after our conversation ended, he made a point of shaking my hand,
Mm,
reaching out to me and shaking my hand before he left the room, which he did not have to do. And I am an American. I live, in the United States. And I mean, for him to do
yeah.
that, that really meant a lot. That moment I don't think was captured on film, but as he left the room, he said he just made a really big point of, I want to shake hands with you. And that
Oh,
was particularly moving as well. But I have a lot I could say about the late president of Iran. I'm sure we'll get into that as we go on.
well, I wanted to bring about this. A lot of the comments that I had when I was posting about it, underneath, you know, were pretty ignorant, and again, alongside the Western propaganda. So let's start with this. Why do Americans automatically just have this visceral hatred or see them as enemies of Iran? And many of the people do quote that when they demonstrate, they say "death to America, death to America," and so that's a big deal. To the there's no depth to the arguments. It's not even an argument or a debate. They just have demonized an entire nation. And I was wondering if you could provide people with a little bit better history and what's propaganda, what's truth, and what the source of that, is.
Well, when I visited Iran in 2015, I actually attended an event where the supreme leader of Iran spoke, and he was addressing the question of death to America because they had just signed the Iran nuclear deal. And when he spoke, he actually made clear in his remarks that when they say death to America, and they refer to America as the great Satan, they're not referring to the people of America. They're referring to the economic system and imperialism and war. And it really just kind of breaks my heart that that's what America means to people in Iran. But if you think about the fact that they had a brutal dictatorship imposed on their country for decades, you had the Shah of Iran who tortured people, who disappeared people, who was just a brutal, brutal authoritarian leader. And the United States backed him up, and the CIA advised his, torturers on how to carry out their torture and gave them lists of people that might be, questioning U.S. foreign policy or might be involved in protest movements, and helped the Shah arrest those people and torture them. And I mean, if you look at the whole history there, they have a reason for seeing the United States as an oppressor. And the fact that much of their country was kept in poverty. They didn't control their own oil resources. It was under the control of the Rockefellers and ExxonMobil, and they had this huge amount of oil wealth, but they were being impoverished. And yeah, they identify the United States with imperialism, with this, monopolistic capitalism, keeping the world poor. And so to them, America, very much means a system. But when I saw the supreme leader of Iran speak, I remember he said in his speech, he said, we oppose the crimes of ISIS, just like we oppose the crimes of the police in the United States, referring to the police brutality and a lot of the recent, killings. And he said, they're both the same, and we're opposed to terrorism, but we're not opposed to the American people. And I mean, I really hope that we could someday have a world where America means something different to people around the world, where America, is not
Mhm.
symbolic of militarism and death and
Bombings.
attacks and impoverishment of countries, but that's what it means to the people of Iran right now. So I think when we talk about death to America, we have to see it in that context.
Okay. Okay. And I also feel like there's a bit of this religious aspect to it, Christian versus Muslim. Could you talk a little bit about the Islamic faith, but just the difference between some of the extreme thought, the moderate thought, and I would say Christians have the same issue. They have Christians that are quite extreme and Christians that are moderate. I mean, could you
Well,
talk a little
it's
bit about?
interesting. In the Middle East right now, there are basically three wings of Islam, three major schools. The first is the Muslim Brotherhood, and that's funded by the government of Turkey and the government of Qatar. And they are what you might call westernized Muslims, where they will say things like America is more Muslim than the Middle Eastern countries are. They love free market capitalism. They love technology, etc. And that's one layer. And they tend to be Sunnis. Then you have from Saudi Arabia, you have Wahhabism. And Wahhabism is, very much, very traditional. They believe in an absolute monarchy. They believe in, absolutely doing things as if it was in the time of the Prophet. And that's what ISIS comes out of. That's Al Qaeda. Bin Laden was a Wahhabi. And Wahhabism is this very, very extreme interpretation that wants to go back to the 1400s. And they also tend to be Shias, but they have, a different interpretation than the westernized Muslim Brotherhood folks. But then you have this third layer, and that's what the Islamic Republic of Iran is, and that is the Shia revolutionary current. They're not Sunnis, they're Shias. And they view Islam in the history of revolutionary movements that came in the aftermath of the death of the Prophet Muhammad, that revolted against the caliphate, saw the caliphate as corrupt and oppressing people. And they talk about martyrdom and standing with the oppressed, and they are kind of a third tradition that you could call it, the Shia revolutionary tradition. And Hezbollah in Lebanon comes out of that tradition. The Houthis come out of that tradition. And the Shia interpretation of Islam is the basis of the Islamic Revolution. And they very much view their movement as part of the wave of national liberation struggles that came after the Second World War. I mean, they admire Malcolm X. They have a street named after Bobby Sands, the freedom fighter for Ireland.
Mhm.
They supported Nelson Mandela and his struggle against apartheid in South Africa. They criticize capitalism. One of the slogans of the Islamic Revolution was not capitalism, but Islam. They also say neither East nor West, meaning that they were neutral in the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States. Neither East nor West. War of poverty against wealth is another one of their slogans. And the Shia current kind of represents I mean, I guess they wouldn't use the word socialist, but it is very socialistic in its essence and very anti-imperialist and very much focusing on struggling against injustice, trying to build a society that puts the needs of people first. And there is an emphasis on tradition, but it's not the Wahhabi thing. You don't have women with their entire faces covered up. That's actually illegal in Iran. That's what they do in Saudi Arabia. Women in Iran vote. Women in Iran are generals in the military. There are more women attending in the public university system in Iran than there are men. It's a totally different wing of the Islamic current, and they have been on the forefront of fighting against Israel.
What and for people that are watching that watched your take on all of this, on this accident that happened with the helicopter, I guess I just want to say, it was a cloudy, foggy day. It's a border that's pretty problematic. Actually, it's not necessarily a friend of Iran, right? They were having a good conversation, but there's been problems in the past. And the foreign minister and the president were in the same helicopter. I mean, first of all, why did they get in that helicopter? And second of all, in your opinion, and second of all, do you think this was an accident, or are there too many coincidences of violence right now against leaders in the recent weeks?
Well, Tara, I can only go on what I know. And I have no evidence, no solid evidence that this wasn't just an accident. So I have to go with that. But the fact that people all over the Middle East and all over the world, and especially in Iran, are speculating that this is some kind of conspiracy from Israel or from the United States, I think that we need to understand that's not just people being crazy on the internet, that comes with some real history.
Right.
1988, there was a civilian aircraft, just people that were traveling. Iranian civilians were flying, and it was shot down by the U.S. military. The U.S. Navy shot down an Iranian civilian aircraft. And then Ronald Reagan and George Herbert Walker Bush both refused to apologize and said that nothing wrong was happened. Do you imagine an airplane full of civilians, was shot down in the ocean? They all die. And then the president of the United States says, "Oh, yeah, well, we don't apologize. I mean, and that they don't forget about that." The fact that their national hero, Qasem Soleimani, who was the leader of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards, he was invited to Iraq to negotiate a peace treaty, and he was negotiating, and then he was on his way back to the airport, and then he was killed by an airstrike the most cowardly way. And he was the national hero of the country. And more recently, we saw Israel blow up and destroy the Iranian consulate in Damascus,
Yeah.
which is a huge violation. So the idea that they might be suspicious that this is yet another act of foreign assassination or foreign sabotage, I don't think we should view that as completely crazy, and I don't think we should just laugh about this and say, oh, that's outrageous, that's crazy. I mean, there's a reason that they might expect that fits a pattern. Now, I don't have any evidence that anything more happened. And as a journalist, I can't go around saying that, oh, I think this is the case if I don't have the evidence. So
Right.
I'm not going to speculate that something more happened, but I am going to be respectful of Iranians who might feel that way.
And that brings me back to the question of your impressions of the president of Iran when you met him, and why you were honored, and how that made you feel as an American, and what was going through your head when you were interviewing him.
Well, it's kind of similar to what I said to the Russian president when I spoke to him. I said that I thanked him from the bottom of my heart for his interview with Tucker Carlson and how he presented a different style of leadership than we have in Western countries. He went over the whole history of Russia. He explained geopolitics with a huge amount of depth. And when our leaders in the United States talk, they talk in terms of scandal and gossip and what the polls are saying today and what the rumors are about their political opponent and what the latest talking points are. And when I talk to leaders in the East, when I talked to the Russian president and when I talked to Ibrahim Raisi, what I was hearing was a completely different style of leadership. I mean, this is a guy who was a judge for a very long time.
Mhm.
He's a cleric, an Islamic scholar. And every answer that he gave me was based on a long-term vision and how he can carry out the Islamic Revolution of Iran, and how he can, run the country in accordance with their revolutionary tradition, with the changing nature of geopolitics and the shift to multipolarity in the world, and with the goal of raising people out of poverty, of building greater and closer ties to China and to Russia. And when I spoke with him, that really came across. I was talking with someone who had, there's a word that you don't hear very much anymore. They say statecraft.
Right.
That's what I hear when I hear the Russian president speak, and that's what I heard when I spoke with Ibrahim Riazi. Was I heard people that are, taking statecraft very seriously, not politics, but statecraft.
And what you mean by that is more of a taking into the totality of history, the needs of the people, the wants of the majority, rather than the few. Is that what
And
you mean?
viewing politics like a science almost, the nature of government like it is a scientific thing, like a doctor studies for years to learn how the body works and
Right.
how to give you treatment, etc. And that that you don't want just any random person to be your doctor. You want someone who really knows what they're doing, who will bring a very sophisticated way of doing it in order to give you your treatment. And that I think in the East, people want their political leaders to be more like doctors,
Right.
rather than to be like somebody you would have a beer with, and I think that is a much more healthy way of viewing things. Governing is not for everyone, right? I mean, obviously, we want a government that reflects popular will and
Mhm.
et cetera. But the idea that our leaders should just be these relatable cartoon characters, that's
Right.
not something I see in Eastern society, and that's much healthier, I think.
Yeah, I know. It's the thing about the West where they want their leaders to be, oh, he's someone you could just have dinner with, or just, go out with. No, we don't. We want someone who's very dedicated and very well educated, particularly, or that just care. I mean, let's face it, Caleb, in America, what politician cares about the American people? I mean, I don't care what your political affiliation is. When it comes to Biden, he doesn't, and I know this because I've met him and I know him, he doesn't care about the American people at all. He cares about
Mhm.
himself and his family and his power, and that's it. And I can say this from a very educated place, that he does not care. Whereas with President Putin, and now living here in Russia, I see the results, cares deeply about his country and about its people. And he could be, out on a yacht hanging out and retired at this point, but he is not. He is doing the work and he works very hard, and you see it as they show the meetings that he does per day. It's amazing what he does. And when he gives a media interview, it's 2.5, 3 hours, 4 hours long. Whereas with, the American president, he's in bed by 5, right?
Right. No, totally. And I mean, I think about how when I go around the world, I tell people that if you watch American media,
Mm-hmm.
90% of the time you see the United States, you're just seeing New York City or Southern California. But the
Yeah,
country is so much bigger than that. And there are
so different.
so
Yeah.
many people in the United States that our leaders and our media and the elites in Washington, D.C. just don't care about. Right. I mean,
Right.
you talk about the people living in the South, in Georgia and Alabama. You talk about the people living in the trailer parks of New England. You talk about the people in Appalachia. You talk about people in the Pacific Northwest region where I know you're from. I mean, there's a whole country out there. You talk
Yeah.
about here in New York City, even the South Bronx. One of the poorest counties in the country. There's all kinds of people that just don't matter to our leaders. They just
Oh,
don't
well,
matter.
it's so
Yeah.
true. And at the top of the hour, I just mentioned that the divide, that people are saying, oh, are we really that divided? Is that, yeah, America is divided. When you see 13 counties in Oregon that have seceded, they voted to secede from Oregon and to go with Idaho. That's remarkable. I've never seen that in my lifetime where you've had that many counties. It's serious. It's happened. They voted. It's done. And so they're so fed up with the woke or the neoliberal way of doing things that they've literally gone with another state that's more representative of their value systems. And a lot of them are small farmers. So you see, there's been a real attack on farmers in some of these rural areas. So it's interesting. And there definitely is much more of a divide. And what I noticed in Russia is people are very unified, just sort of naturally. People are just, even though it's a very diverse group of thinking, politics, very highly educated people here, and all different kinds of cultural and religious backgrounds, but there's a unity to Russia and towards a forward goal of economic stability, which they've gained. I mean, they had a 5.4 growth this year, percent growth. But I wanted to come back to Iran. I wanted to ask you about where the people are in mourning right now, and deep mourning is still having their funerals. But where does Iran go from here? And what do you know about his replacement, the president's replacement?
Well, they're going to have an upcoming emergency election. That's what the Constitution calls for. So, in the next 50 days, I believe there will be a vote to
Mhm.
determine who the new president will be. But I think we can expect that it will be someone from what they call the principalist, or I guess the critics call it the hardliner camp, because the reason that Riazi was elected um, was because his predecessor, Rouhani, he was the guy who signed the Iran nuclear deal. And he promised that if they negotiated with the United States and they signed the Iran nuclear deal, that things would get better for Iran. And they signed the nuclear deal. They gave up almost all of their nuclear power plants in exchange for the United States in writing, recognizing that they had the right to peaceful nuclear energy under the Non-Proliferation Treaty and lifting a lot of sanctions on the country. And almost immediately after they signed the deal, more sanctions were put on Iran by the United States. And U.S. allies like Nigeria and Saudi Arabia viciously went after Iran's religious allies. Sheikh Ibrahim Zakzaki in Nigeria was detained by the military and held without charges for years because he was a friend of Iran. And
Wow.
Sheikh Namir al-Namir of Saudi Arabia was beheaded and was killed as retaliation for the Iran nuclear deal. And more sanctions were slapped onto Iran in the aftermath of the nuclear deal. And then Donald Trump took office, and Donald Trump said that the way Iran was acting was not, in line with the spirit of the agreement. What does that mean? Right? I mean, the International Atomic Energy Agency said that they had fully complied with the agreement. They had not violated the agreement in one way. They shut down all their peaceful nuclear power plants as the agreement was. They fully complied. But Trump said they were not in line with the spirit of the agreement. So he withdrew the United States from the agreement. And then to top it all off, we had the killing of Qasem Soleimani, which was just a moment of national humiliation for Iran. So in light of that, Iran signed a deal with the United States. And then in response to the deal, they got treated even worse. For a brief minute, they had access to the SWIFT banking system for like a couple months, but that was it. And after that, everything in Iran got worse after they signed the nuclear deal.
Well,
So Rouhani, his predecessor, who was what they call a moderate or a reformist, he was voted out of office, and the hardliners won the election. And a lot of the younger people who are somewhat alienated from the Islamic system, that watch Facebook and Twitter and Western social media and stuff, that had gone out to vote for Rouhani, they stayed home. They didn't vote. Or some of them actually voted for the hardliners, and some of them actually voted for Riazi. So Riazi's election was very much a result of U.S. actions. They signed a deal with the United States thinking that it would make things in the country better, and it made things a lot worse. And so the moderate reformist camp has been completely discredited politically. So, the next president, we assume, will be somebody from that hardliner camp.
well, I wanted to move on here too and ask you about the recent assassination attempt on the Slavic president and what that means. And also there was some blame placed, or they tried to place some blame on Russia for that, which is ridiculous. But I want you to expand on that, and we can talk about why that was ridiculous. But go
Yeah,
on.
well, that in particular, right? You have a figure in Slavic politics who is known to be pro-Russia, and he was in the Communist Party back when it was a socialist country, and then he's part of the Social Democratic Party, but he's very much a populist, and he's associated with wanting a good relationship between Slovakia and Russia. And he's giving a speech, and a fanatical individual who is very, very pro-Ukraine and anti-Russia now shot him. We understand now, failed to kill him, but shot him. And what's interesting is immediately the media in the country says, "Oh, he acted alone, lone wolf or whatever." But his computer is wiped, before they get to it, which is very interesting.
Yep.
They don't even search his home for a few days. They say, "Oh, well, we just didn't get a search warrant. We don't have a search warrant," and they don't even search his home properly for a few
Mhm.
days. This is somebody who shot a head of state. Like
Yeah.
what's going on here? I mean,
Yeah.
there's something going on, and then they just announce, from the heavens, it's a lone wolf. It's a lone wolf. He acted alone. And it's like, well, if that's the case, why are they not investigating? Well, it looks like somebody's covering up for him, to me. So in that case, again, I don't want to tell you anything I don't know or I don't have evidence for, but I'm looking at that case and I'm saying something's not right about that whole situation right there.
Well, and 2 weeks before, or a week before, he had made a very strong speech against some of the policies of the World Health Organization. He made it clear he wasn't going to comply, that his country was not going to comply with certain things. And I think they still have lockdowns looming in our future. So there's people that are speculating if he made some other international players really angry, like in the West. So I don't know. Like he
Yeah,
was
well, when
known
a
to be very
politician
outspoken.
is
Yeah.
killed, I mean, there are instances in history where I think it looks like there's just a very crazy or very fired up individual who acts alone
Right.
and does something. But there's also instances. I mean, this instance, in Slovakia, this actually reminds me of the death of George Moscone, the mayor of San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
Because he was the mayor of San Francisco. He was kind of like a Bernie Sanders figure. And, he was aligned with Harvey Milk, who was the first openly gay elected official. And they had both been, supported electorally by Reverend Jim Jones of the People's Temple. And we all know what the horrific incident that happened in Guyana, the People's Temple, they all committed mass suicide. And then 2 weeks after that, a former police officer walks into City Hall in San Francisco and kills the mayor and kills Harvey Milk. And this is the mayor of a major city is killed by a former police officer. And then that former police officer only gets a 2-year prison sentence.
Yeah.
And he uses the Twinkie defense. He says junk food made him do it. And if you look
Oh,
at
that's
that, it's
right. I
like,
forgot about the junk food defense. Interesting.
right. If you look at that, and then mysteriously, like a year after he gets out of jail in his 2-year sentence, then that assassin commits suicide. That's very, very mysterious, right? And if you look at that whole thing, like that's different than just some crazy individual. This is a former police officer who
Right.
walks into City Hall. But let's not forget that's how Dianne Feinstein became the mayor of San Francisco. That's how she ultimately launched her career in California politics. She discovered the bodies of Harvey Milk and of George Moscone, and she took the oath and she was sworn in as mayor, and she became quite a big wheel in the California Democratic Party.
She sure
Um,
did. Hmm.
and the Democratic Party, I must say, and you know this better than anybody, they might on paper say things that sound more progressive or whatever, but they are far more corrupt, especially the urban political machines that Biden comes out of, out of Wilmington
Yes.
or whatever. They are notoriously corrupt.
Yes.
And so I look at this situation where we have a so-called lone wolf who shoots the president of a country, and they just forget to search his laptop and they forget to search his home, just couldn't get the search warrant. Oh darn. I look at that, and that looks to me like something's going on there.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And then that brings me to another coincidental event that happened within this last week or so, and that was in the Congo. And I'm not sure, I don't want to put you on the spot. I have been reading about this and watching this, but apparently 3 Americans have been arrested for an attempted coup. What the heck is going on there? And why were Americans there? So of course, the narrative, right? Well, and the other thing that happened was that one of the people that was arrested, his passport became available all over social media, and it became clear that if this was a CIA agent, they're basically going, "You're done." Yeah.
Mm.
So, what is your thought on that?
Well, Africa, it's no secret they are pivoting toward Russia and China,
Yep. Yes.
because, Russia and China are better to Africa than the United States and the Western countries are.
Yeah.
I mean, Russia at this point is providing free fertilizer to African countries.
Right.
I mean, China has built power plants and raised people up out of poverty, and they just, you trade with Russia and China, they give you a better deal. You trade with the United States, they keep your country impoverished, and they use your country as kind of a captive market, where you purchase all your supplies, all your food, et cetera, from the Western American countries, the Western countries. But Russia and China tend to build up the economies of the countries they trade with. So it's a
Mhm.
better deal. And we recently saw a number of West African countries ask the U.S. military to leave. And that's
Yeah.
big, and the United Nations to leave, right? And they're
Yeah.
just saying, no, we got Russia. They've got military contractors and others who can offer us support and protection and stability. And, we don't really want the United States here any longer. And so I can imagine the United States is not thrilled about that, because they say that the flag follows the dollar. And those U.S. troops are there to make sure that country stays under U.S. domination, economically speaking.
Hmm.
So when those U.S. troops are pulling out of various countries, and various governments are saying, you know what, we don't want the United States here anymore. We don't want the United Nations here anymore.
Hmm.
Russia can provide us military support. China can provide us economic development and investment. I'm sure that there's a lot of anger, and it's France in particular that's losing out. It's a lot of French colonies
Yes.
that are asserting their independence. And
And what's
what I
going
thought
on in
was interesting.
Macedonia? Yeah, yeah. I mean, France is a mess right now. They're losing all their colonies, which is, people are done. Yeah, with the
Yeah.
imperialist stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the fact that I thought it was interesting when I was in Russia, and I mean, you probably hear this more than I do, but one thing I've heard it from Lavrov, I've heard it from Russian leader President Vladimir Putin and Maria Zakharova, is they emphasize opposing the legacy of colonialism and imperialism, as
Right.
well as standing up for traditional values, right? Traditional
Yeah.
values, traditional family values. And that seems to be the kind of the double-edged sword, or I don't know what you want to call it, the two international talking points that Russia is pushing right now, is opposing that legacy of colonialism and imperialism, which has kept so many countries poor and impoverished, but also defending the traditional values that many people around the world hold dear to, families and community, and loving your community and loving your country, and all of that. And I think that's interesting, because like that kind of reminds you of the Islamic Revolution of Iran in a way, right? It's got like
Yeah.
socialistic economics, but also a very traditional and religious, outlook. And that seems to be the way at this point, when we talk about countries around the world that are anti-imperialist, that are aligned with Russia and China, they seem to, on the one hand, be opposing Western capitalism and imperialism and the legacy of colonialism, but on the other hand, defending traditional culture and traditional values, et cetera. And I think that's very interesting. And that seems to be a tie. I mean, you can even say that about China. China is a Marxist, Leninist, communist government, but they very much are upholding Confucianism, filial piety, and a lot of the traditional values of Chinese society. while opposing imperialism. And it's
Yeah.
very interesting. And it kind of, that's why I always encourage people to read Alexander Dugin and his concept of the fourth political theory, because that's what he was speaking to, a long time ago. I think that book is pretty old. It's at least a decade, maybe a decade and a half old at
Hmm.
this point. But when Alexander Dugin said that there is like a new kind of political formation that draws from both the left and the right that's rising around the world, and that's kind of the basis of the new anti-imperialism. He was right, and that fourth political theory, whether you endorse it or not, it's not a matter of endorsing it. It's just about acknowledging that it's there. That's what people around the world that oppose Western capitalism and imperialism. If you read his fourth political theory, he pretty well summarizes what they believe.
Yeah. Yeah. Very much so. Well, all that's really fascinating, and I had prompted my audience in my introduction that you have such a vast understanding of history, both American and world history, that I knew it would be a fascinating conversation, and it has been. I wanted to ask you one domestic question, and that was that just came out yesterday or the last few days. It was about the raid of Mar-a-Lago by the FBI and DOJ into Donald Trump's residence. And what was lifted up off the transcript was that they were allowed to use deadly force, against Trump and his family if needed. Now, Trump wasn't there, as it turned out, but then in their defense, and I guess the FBI thought this was a defense, they said, well, we do that in all the cases. But do they? And what a terrible defense anyway. Like, does that mean every time you go in, you're going to use deadly force? So I don't know. I just wanted your thoughts on that, your take.
Well, I think that's particularly interesting due to the fact that Donald Trump is a former president who
Yeah.
has Secret Service protection.
Yes.
And that should raise some alarm bells that, the Secret Service, they will take a bullet for him, right? They're supposed to. And then the FBI has been given permission to use deadly force. Like, what's going on here?
Yes.
You could see a situation here where FBI shoots Secret Service members. Like, this is kind of points to what I've been talking about, how in the United States we're dealing with, like deep state overlap,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, in Russia, you got the Federal Security Services, FSB, they exist.
Yeah.
That's it. But in America, we have the CIA and the NSA and the FBI and U.S. Naval Intelligence, and U.S. Army Intelligence, and the Department of Homeland Security. And we have all these different agencies that all contract private companies that are
Mm-hmm.
all making money, right? And trying to they're competing for the same funding to do similar work. I look at that and I say, we have a situation in the United States where it seems like the powers that be, not just the rich people that have the power, but also the government agencies, the policing agencies, the intelligence agencies, and the military, they seem very divided, and they're not all on a unified same page. They're not all doing the same things. They're all not, following the same instructions.
Exactly. Exactly right. And as you know, I have a lawsuit against the DOJ and FBI for the handling, what they were doing with me with intimidation that's going forward now. And it's just more and more, there's been a focus of them going after, US citizens for what the Biden regime, particularly in particular, has weaponized them to go after political opponents. So what you just outlined, which by the way, I didn't even think about that aspect of it, the Secret Service and the FBI. Because they can't stand down. They have to protect Trump and his family. That's quite a precarious position. And that looks more like going after your political opposition, like we've heard about in other countries, rather than an American way of doing it. But I think America has always been covert in the way it's gone after. And now it seems to be overt, and it's taking people by surprise. It's scaring Americans, I believe, at this point. And where do you see this ending with the DOJ and FBI? Do you see their power increasing or decreasing based on recent events?
Well, I think that if you look at the overall trend of
Mhm.
societies, and especially Western societies, when there's a long-term economic crisis, you have what's called Bonapartism, where one faction of the ruling elite will try to seize control of the state and use it to suppress rival factions of the elite in the hopes of trying to stabilize the economy and use the state to stabilize the economy. And that all the elite want the economy to get better, but they want it to get better at the expense of their rivals, right? And we saw that with Roosevelt. We saw that with Woodrow Wilson. We saw that with Louis Bonaparte in France. That's where the term comes from. And so I expect there will be more state-on-state rivalry and tension. The FBI did meddle in the U.S. elections, let's not forget, and suppress the Hunter Biden laptop story because they wanted Trump to lose. And they went to Mark Zuckerberg and Twitter and other folks and said, this story that we now know is true, the Hunter Biden laptop story, which was true. It was not a Russian propaganda thing. It was true. They made sure it didn't get in the headlines, and they got it banned from social media because they wanted the outcome of the elections to be a certain way. So that already shows that there are policing agencies that have the power.
Oh yeah, they went after the media. They went after the New York Post and threatened the New York Post if they didn't take down their headline. Yeah. It's a remarkable time in history that we live in. It'll be interesting to see how we end up, and I hope, we just have to keep speaking out. We have to supporting independent platforms. And for the audience that has more questions for you or wants to read some of the books that you've written, where can they find you?
Well, I have a YouTube channel. I'm on Twitter, but I work with the Center for Political Innovation, cpiusa.org. And we publish books and we have conferences and we do great work. We've got members all around the country. We do outreach and we're trying to educate Americans about anti-imperialism and patriotic socialism. So you can check us out, cpiusa.org.
Okay, great. Okay, well, thank you. And one final question, because you and I both have talked about the Uhuru Group. I talked about the Uhuru Group to Tucker Carlson and Chairman O'Malley and them facing prison this fall, I believe, is when they're facing their court case again. Could you have any updates for the Uhuru Group and what's going on? And for those of you watching, if you look back through my old videos, many of you have been very supportive. The Uhuru Group was on a couple of times, but they were basically accused of being foreign agents for Russia, but they're not. They're Black socialists now, against the proxy war that's being fought against Russia via Ukraine, and they've been outspoken about that. But there have also been activists for 50 years, that have been fighting against colonialism. So, Caleb, what are your thoughts on where they're at and any news on them?
The trial will be September 3rd is the day the court case opens. I recently had the opportunity to interview Chairman O'Malley on my YouTube channel, their spirits are very high, and they, with Tucker Carlson, promoting them, thanks to you, and others. There's a lot of people that have stepped up to support them, and they are ready to fight this. So, I mean, we'll have to just see what happens. I wonder if the U.S. Department of Justice really wants to proceed with this trial because, I mean, at this point, it's already gotten a lot of publicity, et cetera. And if this trial actually starts, the main thing to remember about the Uhuru case is they are not charged with any crime. If you look at the charge against them, it's that they had some Zoom calls about Ukraine. They had, they had conferences. They published articles about Ukraine. They're charged with exercising their free speech, which they allege is acting as a foreign agent. The allegation, which they say they can disprove, is that they received something like $5,000. I mean, and that's that. You look at how much money in American politics. I mean, $5,000 for a political organization that does the kind of work they do is not going to get you very far.
It doesn't even pay rent.
Yeah, the whole thing is that's a couple months rent. The whole thing is ridiculous. So I feel like the government probably really doesn't want to go to trial with this case. But we'll see, and we'll see what they do. But this is Biden going after his political opponents, and this is why I urge people that are of the left or people who call themselves socialists or communists, they shouldn't be supporting Biden, because here's Biden prosecuting a group of socialists because they disagreed with him. Biden is not your friend, right? Biden is very much acting like a dictator at this point. He's trying to put Trump in jail so he can win the election, and he's trying to put the Uhuru movement in jail because it looks like he doesn't like the fact that they ran against him in the elections. And they're mad that the Uhuru movement confronted Barack Obama when he was
Right.
running for president. They confronted him in Florida and they said, "Why don't you care about the black community?" And they challenged him and humiliated Obama on national TV. And I think that they have never really been forgiven, by the Democratic Party and its corrupt machines for that. And that they do have a base of support in local elections in Florida and in Missouri. They run in elections and they get lots of votes. They have people who rely on them for community services, pregnant mothers who get classes from them, farmers markets for fresh food and such. And that threatens the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party runs St. Louis, Missouri, and it runs St. Petersburg, Florida. And the people there are not living very well, and the Democrats are not really improving things for people there. So the fact that they run in elections and have this community organization with an anti-imperialist message sympathetic to Russia and China, I think the Democrats find it threatening and they want to crush this organization. And I hope that they back down. And I hope the charges are dropped.
Good. I agree. I agree 100%. And I hope that the charges are dropped as well. And we will keep their names and their struggle on our lips and keep talking about it, because unfortunately sometimes in the what's considered the lefty media, they kind of drop cases that they feel that are not comfortable. So I want to call out like some of those broadcasters that are not doing it, that are calling out other things. Come on, you need to step up, you need to be brave, you need to talk about the people that are hurting. And on the right you have January 6th people that are suffering as well,
Yes.
imprisoned. So they're coming. The Biden regime is going after the right, they're going after the left. But thank you so much for your time. And we have all of your links below. So if those of you watching want to get one of Caleb's books or support him in some way, or ask him a question, all of that information's there. And I'll have you back again, Caleb. It's always great to talk to you. Thank you
Very
so
good.
much.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, that's it for the Politics of Survival. We will see you next time, and we have a really great show planned next week, so stay tuned. And also, my book is going to be coming out in Russian, so I'll tell you all about that next show. Take care, and thank you for your support, and to all the new subscribers. Have a good night.